I'm going to show you how to turn this $10 kids toy into a full spectrum camera capable of taking photos and videos that look like this. Add a cheap filter to block visible light and you can capture images and footage that look like this.
Oh.
And the best part is that, unlike most of my projects, this is easy to do. It only takes about 20 minutes and all you need is a screwdriver. But before we get to that, let's take a moment to talk about why these pictures look so alien. To be clear, this isn't a weird Instagram filter or the result of Photoshop work. This is how the images look straight from the camera. To understand how that works, consider the light spectrum and what our eyes let us perceive. You've probably heard that some creatures, like mantis shrimp and honeybees, can see more colors than we humans can. What that actually means is that their eyes are biologically capable of detecting a greater range of the electromagnetic spectrum. Human visible light is only a tiny portion of the overall electromagnetic spectrum. Everything from the radio waves that make up your Wi-Fi signal to the X-ray waves used in medical imaging also exist on that same spectrum. The part of the spectrum that we can see, from about 380 nanometers to 700 nanometers, is what we call visible light. Frequencies just above that are in the infrared, and frequencies just below that are in the ultraviolet range. The cones and rods in our eyes simply aren't stimulated by those frequencies, so we can't perceive them. Camera sensors, on the other hand, don't necessarily have the same limitations. The range can vary a bit, but a digital camera sensor may be sensitive to light wavelengths from around 350 nanometers to around 1,000 nanometers. In most cases, sensors are sensitive to far more of the infrared range than the ultraviolet range. So you have some ultraviolet and a lot of infrared light exciting the light sensing elements of the digital sensor. Even with typical red, blue, and green filters, you'll get some of that light passing through and increasing the recorded brightness on those channels. The resulting full spectrum images can look odd. For example, everything might have a reddish tint to it as the infrared light passes through the red filter and increases brightness on that channel. But we can also sometimes capture photos of details we don't normally see. Foliage, for example, reflects a lot of infrared light. A photo of that foliage will look almost white, as the camera sensor sees it as much brighter than our eyes do. In most cases, this is all a bad thing. For general photography, people want their photos to look similar to what they saw with their own eyes. For that reason, camera manufacturers put filters in their cameras to block light outside of the normal human visible spectrum, especially infrared light, as the sensors are particularly sensitive to those wavelengths. Some of us, however, don't want to block that light for creative reasons. We want to capture as much as we can. So that's what this modification does. We're removing the infrared filter so that we can capture the full spectrum that this camera's sensor is capable of detecting. There are professional services that will perform this modification on popular DSLR and mirrorless camera models, but between the camera and the service, that's a lot of money to spend. In this project, I'm going to show you the cheapest possible way I know of to capture full spectrum videos and photos. This is all possible thanks to this silly little camera. It costs literally $8.99, brand new on Amazon. This camera is sold under a couple of different brands in both pink and blue. I'll put a link in the description to the one I bought. It's obviously meant for kids, but it is a completely functional camera that can record digital video and capture digital photos. It doesn't have a viewfinder, but it does have an LCD screen with live view. The recorded video has a resolution of 640 by 480 at 30 frames a second. Honestly, pretty darn bad, but what do you expect for this price? Photos seem to be the same resolution, just blown up to 4000 by 3000 for some unknown reason. Still, the camera does come with a 32GB SD card, which feels pretty generous. But I can't take credit for finding this camera. I actually learned about it from 3D Sage, who built a bullet time rig using 10 of these things. I wrote an article about that project for Hackster and immediately ordered a camera for myself to tinker with. It turned out to be very hackable, and removing the infrared filter is pretty easy, so let me show you that process now. To get started, remove the 6 screws holding the 2 halves of the camera body together. Then take out the 2 screws holding the digital sensor in place. We're already halfway done. You can disconnect the sensor's ribbon cable if you want, but it isn't really necessary. Next, unscrew the lens assembly from the sensor housing. It will probably be held in place with a bit of glue, so this might require a bit of force. Also keep in mind that this is how you adjust focus, so you may want to mark the threads or something. The front element is hard to get off. It's just a friction fit but with some glue. It will take some force and you might break the plastic a little. You can then pull out the infrared filter, which looks like a tiny translucent blue square. With that out, you can put the lens assembly back together. A dab of super glue may help to reattach the front element if necessary. Then just reverse the previous steps to reassemble the camera. It should now record full spectrum video. To test it, you'll need a source of infrared light, and the sun is a good one. Most infrared photography is done outdoors for exactly that reason, as artificial lighting has little to no infrared. Plants tend to look particularly interesting, as they reflect a lot of the infrared light and will look very bright. Leaves that are dark green in a normal photo will look almost bright white in a full spectrum or infrared photo. This modification will let the camera record in full spectrum, which will look something like this. To record infrared, which looks like this, you'll need a way to block most of the visible spectrum so that the camera is only picking up light in the infrared range. You'll want an infrared pass filter for that, which is exactly the opposite of the infrared blocking filter that you just removed from the camera. There are many different varieties with thresholds set at different wavelengths. The one I have is advertised as blocking light below 685 nanometers and allowing light above that. You'll want one with a threshold somewhere in that neighborhood. I'll link to this one in the description, but I wouldn't really recommend it. It's meant for telescopes and it's much larger than it needs to be. But beware, there are a lot of counterfeits and scams out there. The most telling sign is if the glass looks red. Remember, the purpose of this filter is to block visible light. If a bunch of red light is getting through, then it's not doing its job very well. A real filter should look black because it isn't letting through any visible light. The red ones are just tinting your image red. Regardless of the filter you choose, you'll need to hold it in front of your camera. This thing isn't threaded for filters, but you could always 3D print an adapter or glue an adapter ring onto the camera. If you like doing this kind of tinkering, then you'll probably need fabrication services at some point, and I recommend this video's sponsor, Pixabay. I've been using Pixabay services for several years and have always been very happy with the results. Seriously, I can't count how many PCBs I've had them make for me. They offer high-quality PCB manufacturing, 3D printing, CNC milling, and more. You'll get professional-level parts that take your projects to the next level at a very affordable price. And it's even more affordable if you use my link in this video's description. That will give you a $5 credit towards your first order with Pixabay. So consider using Pixabay for your future projects. All the videos and images I've shown you have been straight out of the camera without any editing or processing. If you've seen really impressive full spectrum and infrared photography in the past, these might look a little disappointing. A lot of that is thanks to the poor resolution, but it's also because this camera can't save raw images. In an ideal world, you would get a raw file with every bit of data that the camera captured. You can then process that to get the exact colors you want, which is how photographers capture those amazing gold hues. Is that kind of processing cheating? I don't think so. No matter what, the infrared light that we can't see is being converted into a hue that we can see. Those photographers are simply using editing tricks on raw files to choose the hues. Regardless, you won't be able to do most of that with the pictures and videos from this camera. They come out already compressed, so most of the data is lost, but you can still do a bit. There are lots of guides out there, and you'll want to focus on white balance changes and hue swaps. By the way, you may also notice the colors changing a bit while you're recording. That's the camera's automatic white balance algorithm trying to make sense of what it's seeing. Should settle down after a moment. The final thing I want to say is something that 3D Sage also pointed out. There isn't any way to remove that stupid timestamp at the bottom left. It's burned into the image and there isn't any setting to turn it off. You could always crop in, but then you'd be losing some of that limited resolution. So yeah, just set your expectations appropriately. Remember, this camera is less than $10. Alright, I hope you have fun and thanks for watching.